So hello everybody. Today we would be talking one of the very important and crucial session, and it's going to be part of every developer's life. Okay, means when you are in IT organizations, you are the person responsible for your code. As a developer, if you have coded something, whether it's working properly or if there is any problem or bugs with your code, then you are the person who needs to dig it out, fix it, and then roll it on in the further stages. So that means if something is messed up, if something is not working as expected, yes, you have to do a lot of things in order to identify first what's going wrong. Once you identify what's the problem, then immediately the next step would be providing the solution for it. Okay, always, now the bottom line is always providing solution becomes very easy and a simple task only if the analyzation of the problem is done properly. Okay, means if you don't know what exactly is the problem or what piece of code is actually creating the problem, if you don't know that, then automatically fixing it, you can just forget it, because in IT you cannot just keep on guessing like, okay, this might be the problem, that might be the problem. It doesn't work out that way. The only thing what you have to make sure is you identify and pinpoint the root cause of the problem. Okay, why this problem is occurring, what might be the reason. So that is what the topic for today's session is, how to debug any application. Okay, so don't just simply associate this debug term with a debugging of Eclipse or some kind of remote debugging things. Debug is nothing but first finding a problem, like what is the problem and how you are going to solve it. So that process by which you have to identify any problem which comes in your IT company. So today we would be doing that, and it's a series of steps. Okay, and the Eclipse debugging that we are going to see in coming future, maybe within a few days, so that is also a part of this debugging process only. Okay, but ideally now, whenever a problem comes, when you are developing or when you are testing your code, or secondly when suppose tester has found a bug, or thirdly when there is a production error, or anytime, means whenever there is a problem, it might come at any phase, anybody might catch it. But at that point of time, how you should actually proceed in identification of the problem, that is nothing but how do you debug your application. Today we would be seeing that. Okay, now first of all, before really picking up the topic, what is going to happen is, debugging is a pretty simple step-by-step process. Okay, how it works out, it works pretty straight. Firstly, you perform step number 1, okay, which is the most simplest and the quickest way which can give you the result. Okay, if that is helping you to getting down to the problem identification, means using that simple step, if you are able to find the problem, then no need to go for the later bigger stages. Okay, but suppose you have done your best in that step number 1, but still you are not able to figure out what the problem is, then you go to the next stage. Okay, which might be a bit more time consuming, but it would again guarantee more chances and possibilities of identification of the problem. Okay, second, if the step 2 is also not helping, then you go to the next step, step 3, which is going to be more heavy process, which would take more time for identification, but which can definitely sure shot give you the actual root cause of the problem. Okay, so that is how the step-by-step approach should be. And it can be like you can straight away go to step 3 and directly pinpoint the problem, but like I said, it is a kind of heavy process, it would take more time. So today we would be learning, and as part of these next few topics that we would have, we need to understand this debugging process, starting from the simplest and the quickest one to the complex one, which would definitely give you the actual problem. So now the thing is, what is the simplest process? First of all, many people, you people who are listening, this might have heard this term called as Log4j. Okay, it is one of the very commonly used tool, and for any project you go, there is going to be some logging tool. Okay, believe it, if without a logging tool you cannot really do project development. It's that basic, it's that common, and even anybody, basically a fresher, experienced person, a person who is doing coding is definitely going to work with a tool like Log4j. Okay, basically a logging tool. So now why this is used for and what are the problems, and let's discuss. So first step, whenever there is a problem, the first help that people would get is through the Log4j tool. Okay, and it is really going to simplify life, how to what exactly is the problem, and it would pinpoint you, okay, this is where the things are going wrong, then you have to go back to the code, fix it. So all that thing we are going to do today. Okay, so now firstly let me ask a simple question. If suppose you have written a piece of Java code, simple, void add method int a comma int b, or let me rename it process method, okay, int a int b, and there is some logic actually happening here. This logic can be anything, okay, maybe a into something b plus blah blah blah. So you have written a lot of calculations and manipulations with respect to a and b, and suppose in the end you are just returning one value. Int is the return type and you return one value, something. Okay, let's not focus on what is the logic behind it, but just assume that you have done quite manipulation with a and b. Maybe a is equal to a plus 5, a into 10, and then power exponential. You have written some, used some math class methods, power and all those factorials, and you have done a lot of things basically with a and b. But in the end the value returned is only a integer value. Okay, so now what would happen is when you are actually testing this method, it might be possible that the complex logic of manipulation that you have written in this process method, okay, that might contain some errors, or it might be like due to some typing mistake or due to anything, basically something might go wrong in this calculation, because of which the return type is going to be affected, right? Means from your perspective you are giving some input, you are getting an output which you are not expecting. Okay, means return type different, means you are not expecting that, and definitely in the logic something has gone wrong. So now is the point when you start fixing the problem. Okay, so what people generally do, right, when you are in college days also, you would blindly go ahead doing something like this: System.out.println, and suppose in between while you are doing the calculations, here you might be writing a, and similarly you would do b. Nothing but you would start printing the values and intermediate state of processing on the console. Okay, so what is going to happen when you are running this kind of method? At runtime, these values would be displayed on the console, and then you would know what is happening when you pass these values of a and b and where exactly things are going wrong. Okay, simple. That is how everyone does it. A fresher in college days would do this only, right? A problem comes, he simply prints the intermediate steps on the console and identifies it. Okay, but one thing very clear you have to believe, okay, that System.out.println is a very heavy line. Okay, System.out.println, yes, it's a really very heavy line. Why I can say that? Okay, like before actually believing that it's a heavy line, initially I used to just believe what others say. It's heavy, it's heavy, it's heavy, don't use it, do use some other thing, nothing but a logging tool like Log4j, which would be more lightweight in nature and which would which is more flexible for logging, and whatever you do with SOP, it's pretty less, and the same thing you can do with Log4j with even far more better things. So always prefer using Log4j instead of System.out.println. Okay, that was a very basic baseline, like this is heavy, that is very light, and you use that because it is having a lot of other advantages also. Okay, so then I blindly started using Log4j. But there came a moment in one of my project okay, in which what we identified, like we developed the entire code and we were doing some load testing. Okay, we fired some thousands of requests per second onto our application. Now after doing that, a point came when our CPU was just jumping to 80% and 90%. Okay, and believe it, it was not a complicated logic. The logic was pretty simple, but still as a developer I was really confused, like why is the CPU being consumed at that high level, 70% to 80%? I'm not really giving that load to the CPU, but where exactly is the problem going? Okay, so now that gave me a shock, like okay, this should really not happen. Why? Because when we add more complex functionality and that would run in load, then definitely the CPU would touch to 100% and no further processing would happen. That means there is some serious problem in the code. Okay, and from that perspective everyone were like crazy, and you have to identify, you have to fix it. And then we started digging things, and finally, believe it, we found that at a lot of places inside loops and all that, people used System.out.println. Okay, means it was doing something which was really heavy, and God knows what. Immediately my lead said, okay, let's first of all remove the System.out.println wherever it is being used in the code, replace it with the logger statement. Okay, replace it with the logger. That simply means whatever is possible with System.out.println, the same feeling can be achieved with logger also. Okay, so we did fine, replaced all of this. One person doing that whole thing for the entire project, that's also enough. So once the entire thing was replaced, means replacing the System.out.println with some other statement which gives the same result, nothing but somewhere you can find what is the value of A, B and C at runtime. Okay, we did that, then we deployed our code again, and believe it, okay, it was a practical feeling. Immediately the CPU dropped down to 40%, approximately 40. Okay, so that is where I realized how badly System.out.println can affect the code. Okay, but believe it, 70%, 40%, there is a big difference because it was very heavily used. Now the point is, no matter how many, so this is one of the really major problem. It is heavy in nature, it consumes more CPU. Why it consumes more CPU? Okay, now let me just try and open this class, system class, Control Shift T. I just do system java.lang.system. Yes, okay, I don't have the code. Attach source, let's see from where we can get it. Browse. It's an external location for me, external folder. I'll rather find it via this. Suppose it's in C drive, program files, Java, GDK, okay, src.zip. I can simply choose this. Okay, so this is how we attach code towards a basic Java thing. Okay, so now what I did was system. Now what is there? System.out. So we just did Control Shift T, open it, went here. Control O is the shortcut which opens you the references and all. System.out. Out is this variable. Just go inside this F3. So F3 takes you to the actual definition of a class or a method. You go there, you have to find a println method, so simply just copy it, do probably Control O, yes, paste it here. We are passing something, right? So let's see, we are passing string, and just see what's here. It's synchronized. Okay, so that means, and believe it, this is a System.out.println, and whenever anybody uses it, So it synchronizes, nothing but in the code, if 1,000 times it's being used, it would be synchronous in nature. Okay, because out is the single object available. If you do system.out, so automatically what happens, basically out would be initialized only once in the system class, and when you are accessing, so it's the same object which is being used by all your calls whenever you type system.out.println. Now when the same object is being used, automatically this synchronized of this. When the same object is being used, synchronized of this makes all threads to pass one by one. Okay, what they do is a different story. They write some print there and new line character, that is internal logic. But the problem here is first step itself, it is like this heavy. Okay, so by this way what we realized is when we were running it on a bigger load, we simply identified that the CPU was very high, and after removing it, replacing it with a logger statement, we found that there was a noticeable improvement. So now ultimately as a developer, I from that day onwards believed, okay, I would never use system.out.println for doing project development. Okay, and I would never recommend anyone to do it. Okay, but still what happens is, even though I personally believe that I would tell 1,000 people, but unless they also understand its importance, right, it is going to affect the project for sure. But assume there is a fresher comes in. Okay, now as a fresher, if I tell him, it might not really make sense. What do you mean by heavy process and how it is going to do it? And since they have not realized it, so that is why they are not going to believe in it blindly. So that means even though we tell people what is right, what is wrong, but still there might be someone who might not follow it. Okay, and say that okay, even though it's heavy, let me use it and all, and in the end problems would be coming. Okay, so now we really cannot help in these kind of situations, but we have to make the process very mature enough. Okay, and that is how things would be moving. So now the next thing is system.out.println. Okay, if you run it, it prints the data on the console. Okay, means if I just run it as a Java application, it prints it on the console. Once the console gone, automatically your data would also be lost. Okay, now this data, this debugging that we are doing, it is not just for doing one-time work. Okay, just imagine that you have done a lot of coding, a lot of testing, everything fine, means till your satisfaction as a developer you have done it, but still it goes to production and there some problem comes which never came while you were testing and all that, but in production it came. Okay, it can happen. Now when in production the problem came, point is how are you going to solve this kind of problem, right? When you were doing it in your local environment, in dev environment, in testing environment, there you added all these SOP statements and all, and that helped you out. But now in production, first of all, finding this console is not really going to work out. Okay, means when you start a process, if you write SOP statements, console would be there in only one machine, and maybe since it's a Linux terminal, you open a Linux terminal from one machine. Okay, just imagine there is a Linux box in between, and this Linux box can be accessed by multiple people simultaneously. Okay, everyone would sit in their own machines and remotely connect to this server production environment. So from whichever server the actual server was started, okay, console only marks to that machine. Okay, that means as a developer, if you are trying to debug from other places, you are not going to see the console. First of all, that problem is going to come. Okay, now ultimately that means it's not guaranteed that you would get a console in production environment or in some environment for doing the debugging. Now the question comes, if console itself is not there, all your efforts of identification is gone. Right, so you cannot believe on this like, okay, I would print it on console, and if problem comes, why we write it? To identify problems. And if in production problem comes, you're not able to answer that, so that then definitely that is not the way to do it. So this is one of the second reason why SOP should not be preferred. Why? Because it prints the data on the console. Okay, and after printing data on the console, there is not guaranteed that you would be finding the data as per your requirement in later future. Okay, so now since we are not able to find it out, definitely this is not the way to do it. Okay, but some people, what they do is, okay, risking the CPU sometimes, they compromise with that fact. Okay, system.out.println risks the CPU. But what I have seen for one of my project, like when coding is done and you're trying to print the data on the console, okay, that means there is something really important and it would be helping in identifying the problems. If suppose someone by mistake is writing system.out.println, okay, for one project, what people did is they redirected this kind of system.out.println thing to a file. Okay, that means unknowingly, first of all, they would suggest, they would promote like don't use system.out.println in the code. Okay, but still you got to believe that there would be some developer who by mistake or unknowingly would still use it. Generally freshers would do that, or less experienced people would do that. Ideally you should never do it. Okay, but still if somebody is doing that, data would go to the console and which would not help the project when problem comes. So for that, what they did is the system.out.println they redirected. Means rather than printing this kind of statement in a console, you better print it in a file. So that is how life would become simple. Now there are so many ways to do it. If I just open, suppose a new, right click, new Java project, suppose test app. Okay, just pick this project. In this project, just create a new class, right click, new class, main class, commercial.noc.test service. Some conventions would be there while you are trying to do the coding. Add main method. Just assume I have done this stuff. Next, I'm just writing sysout system.out.println basically, and here I'm writing hello world. Okay, so now just as a simple hello world application written, right click, run as Java application. Hello world is printed on the console. That is what it is about. And in production, finding this console itself would be tough. That is where people don't really recognize this, and it would never be written on console. Okay, unless you want some data to be temporarily available. Okay, if you want something for permanent purpose, never prefer consoles. Okay, now the next thing, once the data is available here, people, how they can redirect. Okay, in IT you have to remember one thing, that doing anything is very simple. You just have to effectively use Google to solve your problems. It's not required that you remember everything, you memorize everything. Okay, generally in initial days of career, people get confused with this, like, okay, so many APIs, so many jars and all that we have to know, we have to learn. Practically it's all not required. The only thing what is expected from a developer is understanding. Okay, that you should understand that, okay, this is also possible in programming world. In Java programming you can do this thing also. How you can do it, you need to have a logical approach to that. Okay, if you have the logical approach, later on code you can find it on Google. Okay, nothing but you have to think what you would be doing next. For example, just assume that in an interview, or suppose this question is given to you, system.out.println is printing it on the console. Is it possible, or how can you redirect it to some file? Okay, so now you have to think something. Okay, how we can do it? It's all logical. You have to just think logically, understand and tell it. Even though at the time of interview, if you are not able to answer these kind of questions, okay, maybe you might not give 100% correct answer, but you have to at least tell this point, like how would you do it, what would be your logical thought process if you want to redirect this, what would be the approach. Okay, now what I feel, okay, and what I would tell, basically, even though I don't know how the answer is, simple, I would say answer is here itself in this line, system.out.println. Okay, and out here is nothing but pointing to the standard output device, nothing but your console. That is where whatever you try to print inside this, because of this out nature, is going here. That's the first logical thing which should strike your mind. Second, if this output is currently pointing to console, it's pointing it here. What if you just change this out to point to a file? Whether it is practically possible or not, that is a second story, but at least your logical thought should be clear, right? Oh, if I just point this out to some other place, to a file, automatically life would be simple and your data would not go in console, it is going to go to some file. If you reach to this place also, that means you are there, you're logically thinking and you're answering it on the fly. So that is what your approach should be. You should think on the fly. Okay, you just look at the problem, try to understand what is actually the problem and try to give the solution accordingly. Okay, now suppose you don't know exactly like how you can redirect it, then comes the point of using Google. Okay, simply go to Google, you can type anything, how to redirect standard out to a file in Java. Just see, so many people, they got the same doubt and they are finding it out. So now there are so many links available. There is one tutorial which says that, so let me just open it. Some how do I redirect, and somebody saying, okay, there is a simple using a method called as System.out. So we can redirect the output to a different stream using this set out. How they are doing it, a simple example as well. What they do is, initially console they are just using, means the reference of out, they are collecting it somewhere. Next they are deciding their own file, using file output stream they are pointing to that file, and they created some print stream object using that file output stream, and they are just calling this System.set out of print stream, and this goes to the out.txt. That's it. That means it's that simple. Again back they are setting it to console, nothing but the initial reference which they collected, they are setting it back, and this goes to the console. Means it's that simple. Okay, means it's all possible to work out and find the piece of code in Google. Just the thing is, you should be logically clear like what is going to happen with your move. Okay, now I can simply copy this code, run it, it would give you the same feeling because they have tested it and they are able to find it. Okay, so next example, this goes to the console, this goes to the text, this goes to the console, and what you are saying, goes to console, goes to console, and there is out.txt, so we will get the same result. So it's no point in actually rerunning the same code, but it is how it is going to work out. Okay, so now by this way, sometimes for the project, even though told 1,000 times, people might use system.out.println. So in these kind of cases, one person would generate, because it's static in nature, you just set it once, system.set.out, you change it to some file, and then anywhere in the entire project, anyone who uses that object system.out.println, the value would be modified. So that becomes a one-time effort for the lead, but it takes care that all the logger statements or all the statements that you write using system.out.println is going to go to a particular file, not on the console. But still, like we said, it's a heavy method. The println method that you call, it's nothing but synchronous in nature. So no matter whether you put it onto a file or you put it onto a console, it is going to be synchronous. It is going to consume and wait, threads would be waiting, and that makes it a more troubling environment. Okay, so that is where it's highly discouraged to use system.out.println. You should never use it in your project because these are the very obvious things. Now if not that, we need a tool or we need something which can simplify our life, and the process should be very crystal clear, easy to work with, lightweight in nature, and basically able to address all your problems of logging and giving you information. Okay, for this, people of the market thought there are different approaches. Now one of the very common approach is Log4j. And for any project you go, you would find a logging tool. Okay, just it's not going to be possible that there is not a logging tool. So you have to understand what is a logging tool capable of, how it can solve the problem, and how to practically implement, and what are the pros and cons with the Log4j tool or a logging tool basically. And and are there any limitations with the implementation, and what is the best way of using it. Okay, believe it, Log4j is a tool which provides a lot of things, but there is a systematic way of using Log4j, because if you don't use it systematically, believe it, it can backfire on your application. Okay, in terms of, again, memory, hard disk capacity and all those things, and it might challenge you basically if you have not implemented it properly. So now let us see how Log4j addresses it. So now our basic concern is the data that was printed on the console. You don't want it to be on the console because it's temporary in nature. It should be going to a file, which is possible using Log4j. First thing, Log4j can help you to write data on the console also, and secondly, it can be used to write data on the file also. Both things possible. Second, okay, so that is the first point which we have to get it clear. Can write data on console, can write data on file. Next thing, what you were doing here, if you set a value, System.out, set out, the one which we saw earlier, you set it to one file, okay, and believe it, with one file, so many lines going in one file, it really becomes headache to find the actual thing. Why? Because if suppose you have just done it once, system.setout, once done, go to some xyz.log file. Okay, if you are moving the data there and anywhere in the project anyone is using it, so that means amount by which the file size would go on increasing, it's really going to be a trouble. Okay, and so many lines in the same file, it would kill your readability and finding what you have actually written the logs for. Okay, searching would really become tough. So now that is one of the limitations, like system.out.println, at a time you set it to one file, it just goes there, nowhere else. But Log4j provides a mechanism to work with multiple files. Okay, it's possible to configure a.txt, b.txt, c.txt, or a.log, b.log, c.log. Generally, there is a convention, whenever you write log files, it ends with a .log thing. Okay, just an extension, so that you understand that this is a log file for some application. Okay, why? Because you have many other files, right? Txt files would be there, conf file would be there, property files would be there, XMLs would be there. All these would be some files available in your machine. Similarly, this log file should just contain, it's not some configuration, so it's just logging, so extension is .log for that. Okay, so you can work with multiple files, you can have a number of log files, it's all configuration and possible, easy to work with. Okay, we are going to see all these things practically. Now, next thing, like I said, if you have a single file, in this case, you would be writing a lot of data to it. The file size would really go very huge, and when the file size is going on increasing, okay, we know that when a lot of data is dumped in the same file, its size becomes very huge, and with this huge size, there are so many editors who would fail to load it. Okay, nothing but there is a limitation, like your Notepad or Notepad++ or Edit Plus or whatever editor you use. If you try to open very huge file in that, you might end up seeing a not responding kind of thing. Okay, so that means there are limitations on how big your file size should be. Okay, and this limitation would also always be there. Now automatically, how do you identify this problem? Because Log4j tool, now we have to think, now just think how Log4j team might have thought about before implementing Log4j. Okay, they might have considered all these possibilities and then they would provide the solution. Why? Because if they are not providing the solution, what would happen? People would not use their tool. So they analyzed what all problems might be coming when you log, and while you are trying to log, if any problem, how do you, they have to provide the solution for it. They thought of solution, they provided it, and now we need to understand it. Okay, why? Because we have to use that solution in our project experience. So now what I was talking about is, if you have a log file, you're dumping too much data in that file. Automatically the size going good, big. But loading these big files is not really going to help. Okay, so how Log4j has provided the solution? Simple. Log4j provides a mechanism by which you can decide or fix the maximum file size. Okay, it can be anything, it's up to you how much file size you want. Okay, it's a configuration possible. Okay, like you can say 10 MB file or 100 MB file, or in KBs you can also specify. So that means all these things are possible. You can say that this file should be maximum of 10 MB only. Okay, when you say maximum of 10 MB only, then automatically as soon as file means you are redirecting your statements to the file size becomes 10 MB. After that it's not really going to add more content to the file. Okay, now just try to think, right? If you are providing a solution, there is coming a drawback, right? Like suppose you have defined 10 MB or 100 MB, you are writing data, automatically file size reach 10 MB, then it is not going to increase it more, like 100 MB is not going to become like 110 MB, it's not possible. So by this way your size is always guaranteed, so that your editors would always open it. Okay, but now the problem is editors can open it, that's fine, but where is the data? Right, what would happen if you try to write more data to it? Would it discard it, or would it take the latest and drop the earliest? That was the second concern. So think that Log4j is your project and you can think and analyze a lot of things with this. Okay, so now the second problem, what would you do in these kind of cases? Okay, you can pause the recording now and think about this. Like if you get a problem, just don't forget that Log4j people has done it, but if you get a problem like this, how would you approach it? Logically try to think. Pause the recording here, think about a bit. What would be your approach? Would you first of all tell that no, I am not going to take the latest logs? Or second, would you take the latest, drop the old ones, or would you come up with some other idea? Okay, so that is how the things would be. So okay, so once you have thought about it, then come back and let's see how Log4j people has done it. Okay, now once Log4j people got this problem, what they simply did is they did a rolling kind of mechanism. Okay, they provided an option that you can roll files. Now what do you mean by a rolling file mechanism? First of all, your data, your logs would be moved to one file, suppose a.log. Okay, it would be added up to it, added as soon as the file size becomes your configured ones. Suppose you have configured 100 MB. As soon as it reaches 100 MB, what tool does it? It rolls this file content into another file. Okay, nothing but your a.log can be now transformed into something like, so initially a.log was there, this was the first file, data added, it reached the limit 100 MB of data. As soon as 100 reached, what they do is they change this, roll this to a.log.1. Now when this changes to a.log.1, your entire data which was here, now it is here, nothing but a renaming would happen and a new blank file would be made ready called as a.log, and the new content would be added here. Next, when this file also reaches 100 MB, then what happens? This becomes .2, this becomes .1, and there is a one file like this. Nothing but by this way you are assuring that your data is not lost. It is just moving from one file to another, and at any point of time the size of this file is what you have defined, so you can open it in an editor and see where exactly is the problem. Okay, so by this way Log4j people has tried to address this problem of increasing file size addressed increasing file size problem and also maintaining latest log content. Means they are not discarding it. Okay, why? Because if you discard, there are problems. Now the next thing, you have done all this work, increasing, everything happy, but in the end we stay in a world of limitations. There are physical, practical limitations, right? You run your application over a server. Your server would have the limited maximum, maybe Java JVM size. Your server would have the maximum CPU capability, no matter how big machine you take, but it is having a maximum restriction, right? No matter you spend a lot of time on the codes and all, but there is a maximum limitation. Similarly, your hard disk, it is having a maximum size, right? And someday that maximum might hit, okay, and that is where problems would come. Now just imagine if you are rolling files, if not today, but after 1 month, after 2 months of time, you would realize that there are so many log files created on your hard disk that your hard disk has gone full, right? Again, a practical problem and a big challenge. If once your hard disk is full, further no updates would be written to the hard disk, and believe it, your application might be trying to do a lot of things with the hard disk, right? If logger statements, they are trying to write the data to the file on the hard disk, means if it's not happening, means your threads are blocked there. Okay, if it's not able to write the data, threads are blocked there. When a lot of threads blocked, it becomes like a standstill situation. Your application is choked, it cannot progress. Now when it cannot progress, it's as if your application is hanged and you're from admin, you're trying to log in, you're trying to use something of your site, but it's not responding at all. That is what is again a pathetic situation. That means you cannot really go on increasing the number of files to n. That is again a problem. Means you give a solution, you have to think of the problems and you have to solve the problem. That is how the approach would be for any problem. Okay, here just the example is a log4j, but it can be any problem. Now again, pause, think, how would you try to address this? Okay, and if you're trying to address what problems it might further give, try to think. That is how, if you go for any big interview, these things would be given on the fly. These are nothing but the problems. They would, in question, in interview, they would ask you in the form of situations. If you do this, this would happen, then how would you fix it? You're trying to provide a solution for them. They give you the next case. In this solution, if I do this, then what happens? This is what is happening practically in front of us now. Log4j team, they are trying to identify, they are trying to solve a problem, they are getting some other problem. Now how would they solve other problems so that things would be in the end fine, because in the end people are going to use this widely, right? So they have to develop the best project. Now how they have done it, how Log4j team has taken care of this, it's again simple. They have added a restriction to maximum number of files that can be created. Okay, maximum number of files that can be created. So suppose you can say I want to create only 70 files. Okay, I want to create only 80 files, and you know what would be the file size of each. So 80 files of 100 MB each. So these things you can logically decide based on in what kind of infrastructure in production your code would be deployed in. So you can do your calculation like, okay, I have 10 files, and these, now you have to think from a bigger picture, not just one file but 10 files or 20 files you have in your entire project, which would be logged, which would be increasing, which would be rolling off to other files. What would be the restrictions of all this? Do the calculation, like 10 files rolling to 10 each, so 10 that's 100 into 100 MB, whatever it gives, that is how maximum logs would be consumed, and it is going to fill someday. Now out of the entire CPU or out of the entire hard disk capacity, this much logs gone, means you have the rest of the logs for doing your other exercises. So by this way you can ensure that server is never hanging. Okay, so this is what solution they have provided, like have a maximum restriction on number of files that can be created. Okay, restriction on the number of files that can be created. So you have to properly identify this. Now again, think, is there any problem with this? Okay, is there any problem? Because you have to think of the problem as a developer, as a person. If you're developing a product for yourself, you have to yourself identify what would be the problems and then provide the solution. There is not going to be a client which tells give me this, give me that and all those things. You have to identify what are the problems in your solutions and fix those, solve those. That is what would be making you a responsible developer, an intelligent developer and a trustworthy developer, because you don't just code for the sake of coding, but you're coding to develop the right and the best code. Okay, so now having a restriction on maximum. Now suppose I say in this particular case maximum 3 files should be there. Each file size would be 100 MB. I have given this kind of configuration. Okay, now the next thing that comes in picture is what happens if 3 files reached of 100 MB each, your files are all full, then you're trying to write data to this file. Okay, what would happen? Would it be discarded? Would it be taken up? So how Log4j people do that is the new data would be written in the file a.log, and whatever is the data inside this a.log.2, the last old data would go on deleting. Okay, why? Because somewhere you have to compromise. You cannot really retain entire logs of your project life forever. It's not practically possible. Okay, you cannot retain it. That is where many software companies take a guarantee of if any problem comes for next 3 months or 6 months, we would be actively helping you with the fixes, but after that things might be a bit lazy and all those things. You are anyway responsible for your project, but the thing comes for say 3 months or 6 months time, you can retain the logs. Okay, but now a problem is coming that one solution is Log4j by nature would delete the old logs and just have this one only. This is what is the solution given by them. So now with physical restrictions it is going to help out, but the problem that comes here is what if you want the old data? What if the data is gone and some problem occurred? For example, okay, suppose this kind of code goes in production. A customer says 3 months back I tried to do a money transfer and that was a big amount from X to Y account and that didn't happen successfully. Now the customer might say I didn't get the time to immediately respond to you, okay, about this. I didn't log the complaint immediately, but now I have a reference number with me. Now with this reference number, can you please tell like what is the status of my transaction and revert back the money to me? Okay, so now all these things would come in picture, and this is the actual production, this is the actual life situation, people making and moving money, people doing actual business. And as a software company you cannot say that we cannot refund your money back. We don't know what the problem is, whether whatever you're saying is it really true or lying. You cannot say all that. Your application has to be developed in such a kind of manner that you would be confident in saying, okay, if somebody is saying a complaint, my data not moved, you should have some place by which you identify first whatever complaint is coming, is it real or no? Nothing but is someone just bluffing or is it a valid complaint? You have to confirm it with respect to your data which is there at your side. Okay, so now that means there is one more very important thing which would come in picture as part of your debugging, which is nothing but status tracking. Okay, status would be tracked. If there is some failure, if there is some success, those status would be tracked. Where the status, we cannot keep this status in log files, but just imagine that you're trying to transfer money, it didn't happen successfully. I have logged your status in log file and that log file is getting rolled off automatically. You come after 6 months, you ask us, we would say that we don't have the log files. You would say, come on, it was a big amount I was transferring, your site is a fraud and you're not able to repay my money back, and it's all negative, right? It's not going to work out. That means the status logging, whether to assure that what really happened and what might have gone wrong, you can do that inside a database. So this is one very important thing DB should be mature enough. That is where I said that today's topic is not just Log4j, it is about a debugging process. DB should be mature enough to track statuses or to track status. Okay, now it can be anything. So generally, right, you remember whenever you are doing a money transfer, you would be getting a reference ID. Okay, that reference ID is a unique primary key for you, which would be logged in the database. There would be a record where that reference ID would be there. In that table there would be a column called as status column, and in that status would be like in progress or still pending or completed or initiated or failed due to some reason. Those kind of status would be there, right? So when you give me your reference ID, or now there you have to design the system in that way. If suppose by mistake you say I have not captured the reference ID, then also it's the responsibility of the application to somehow provide the data for you. Okay, so what they would do in that case, they would search based on your email ID or your user ID. Okay, what were the last n number of transactions which he provided? So that means your database should have all that data, and believe it, the data of the database is never going to be deleted, never. Okay, so that is how it would be retained forever. You would have your account, and that is what is the actual business. Okay, maybe you would remove the data, move it in tapes and provide it there, but on an average you would try to do a business for a long term. Just imagine you have opened an account with Axis Bank and you have like good enough money in within your account, 50k. That account stays open for a big time, right? They cannot delete it, they cannot close it, they have to maintain your data. Okay, so now DB has to be made mature enough. So suppose a complaint like this comes, I have tracked it in database, I have made all the required settings. Now I am telling that per customer that okay, fine, we have processed your request and we are seeing that there was a failure from our side, a technical challenge while transferring the money. No issues, we would be rolling back. Okay, generally these would also be there as automated process. It would not be a manual activity like when something fails to roll back or revert back the money. Code would be written for that rolling. Okay, so when some repeated process which runs and tries to refund the money, it's all logic, it's all complicated. You have to think, you have to develop. It's all practically possible, you have to think that. Okay, and fine, you have reverted the money back, saying okay, means first step. When you say that you didn't get the money back, we would go to our database, we would see what is the status of your transaction. Is it failed, or not just we leave, you have to write the coding in such a way that you don't stop at failed. You have to then do some retries. Even after doing some retries, how many times would you do the retry? 2 times, 3 times, 10 times? What should be the frequency of retry? After every 30 minutes or after every 1 hour or less than that? Or the frequency should go on increasing between the attempts. All these are things to be thought of. That is what is practical implementation. You do the retry. Even after retried n number of times, still not happening, then what do? Then go ahead reverting the amount. If in reverting also, means code would be written, it's all automated, don't worry, it's not manual. Try to revert the money. In reverting also, if it fails, that is when the problem comes. In reverting also, if it fails, the status in your database would be as failed only. It is not yet made successful or reverted kind of thing. So now when you complain, we would say okay, we did all this work but still it didn't happen. Then comes the manual settlement. Okay, then you have to manually settle the amount back to him. But the problem is, settling the amount is not a bigger problem. Why? Because it's his money, he was transferring, you have given it back. That is just one thing. But now you have to understand what exactly went wrong when you were processing that data. Right? Because you have written some logic, it is working for everyone, but for this person there came a situation where it failed. That means if it can fail for one person, in similar situation it can also fail for some other person. That is the major problem here, right? And you don't want that to happen for other people, because your business would ultimately be at risk in these kind of cases. Then how do you solve it? That is where Log4j would be used. So that is a process of identification. Now Log4j would come in picture. Like when you are trying to transfer money, you would write logger statements. Open file, see those logger statements. Okay, when this person with this user ID, with this reference ID was trying to transfer money, you open that log file, go to that reference ID. So you would be logging the reference IDs also. Okay, now you go there, you identify, okay, what went wrong, was there any exception. Just see in the log file, you will find everything, because you are tracing the flow of the application. You can write to your understanding what you feel is enough for giving you the clarity of the problem. Okay, it's not just like for fun you write the loggers. You write the loggers so that if some problem comes using these statements, you should be in a position to identify it and fix it. So your statements would be written in that manner. Okay, so now you write all those statements, go to the file, spend time, understand what went wrong, then come back, provide the fix, test it, deploy it. That is how the things would be. Okay, so this is the way by which fixes keep on going to production also. Okay, production bugs, that is why people provide production support. Why? Because at runtime problems might be coming and you have to identify those problems. Code would already be there, but you have to identify. Okay, now once all these things done, but let's come back to our starting position where we said Log4j is having a maximum restrictions to the number of file. Now that person has filed a complaint, say after 6 months, and the log files are rolled off. Using the database, you would immediately refund the money back to him, but still you don't know the root cause, right? And then that is the reason it turns into a bigger problem, because you know that, okay, your application is failing for some cases, and when you know it, definitely for means in future also it might fail for some cases. Okay, so now what is going to happen in this case? Log4j stops here. It just says this. Okay, now for project, it's not a problem of Log4j now. Why? Because it's trying to do all these things, it's trying to do the best to help you out. But still, if there are problems, you are living in a world of restrictions, of hard disk restriction, memory restriction. So still Log4j is trying to help a way out, but now there is a bigger problem. It has made it optimized. Use it wisely, use it intelligently. How much should be the file size, how many number of files you should have. Use it all intelligently. But later, if this problem comes, how do you do that? So for some of my projects, what people did, okay, they wrote a kind of a process which used to zip these log files. Okay, just compress it and move these log files into a different location altogether. Okay, different location of a different hard disk, maybe in different node. You just move all these zip files so that there it would be there for a long term. It's up to you, like how much you can invest now on the infrastructure, how big that hard disk should be, or should you, it's all, again, it would come a point like, what if that hard disk gets full? There is always a restriction. It now depends on your capability. What do you think? How problematic or how headache would be there while you're trying to log and store the files? Means how complicated the logic is it really required to log these many number of statements? All those things would come in picture. Why? Because if suppose now you are a developer, you have for writing one method, for identifying a problem, you have written so many logger statements. Okay, now it's not again practically possible to come up to you and say that, okay, don't write those many logger statements. Why? Because you would say it's required for my functionality. But in production, if there are like 10 logger statements in a single method, if that method runs n number of times, it would be like n into 10. Okay, and which is nothing but going to speed up the process of log file filling. You're writing more files, so more lines in a file. So the file size reaches 100 MB quick, rolls back quick. You're zipping and all that and moving, nothing but filling of your hard disk is quicker. Okay, so now all these would be problems. So that is where, but this is a kind of solution. You can move the data somewhere else so that you have a backup, and you can take a responsibility of that. Okay, for 3 months, 6 months data we would keep it, and beyond that we are going to delete the data. Why? Because your database is mature enough to identify major problems, but the root cause we would fix it when it reproduces. That is where from next time onwards you would be always like, okay, if is there any transaction which is failing in this manner. Okay, so that you have the logs, and in that logs you identify, so you would start keeping a special eye for this use case. Okay, so that is how it would happen. But now so this is one solution. Okay, but now the thing is, I discussed one point here. The point was, if suppose the developer is going on writing so many statements, and in production also so many statements are going, okay, the rate of filling the hard disk is full and all your things would be full. Means the work which you logs and all which might be collected in 6 months, you are collecting all that in 2 months only. Why? Because your rate of filling is that high. Okay, unnecessary logging is also bad for your project. Okay, you should log very wisely. But now you might say like, okay, no, as a developer I need to have those loggers. If it is a problem in production, so they should take a maybe higher machine, hard disk and all that. The capability should be high. Why? Because I cannot compromise on my quality. Think from developer perspective. He's saying it's a management headache. They should take bigger machines. Why? Because if I don't add those many loggers, automatically I am not convinced like code is working properly. Okay, and while you test, you need to have more loggers. Then what? So one way is either you add loggers while you develop, but before giving to production delete it. Okay, that's very bad, right? You have now thousands of classes, thousands of lines of code. People say kilo lines of code. Okay, KILO, kilo lines of code. Kilo is nothing but basically your lines of code. KI, kilo, LO, lines of code. Okay, and people also say KLOC, LOC and KLOC. Actually these are the two terminologies, lines of code and kilo lines of code. So you might hear sometimes like when the project is almost at the ending, people might say these two terms, kilo lines of code and lines of code, how much have you written for this project and all. So means when it is like this big, in thousands lines of code, in that going and manually deleting logs, it's irritating, man. It's not going to work out. So that is where again this is a problem in front of Log4j, right? People might add so many loggers which goes to production. Why? Because you cannot really control the feelings of developer, right? They can write n number of things, so they have to, Log4j team has to develop a kind of thing. Now if you think, then you can't find it as a problem. Now just imagine how maturely Log4j team might have thought about it. Okay, it's not really like impossible task, but it's like practical experience. For many projects they might have faced it. Okay, in production going and it's filling so fast, that means there is a problem. They thought about it, they analyzed it, and believe it, they provided a solution for it. Okay, now you try to think how you can provide. If you already know it, well and good, but believe that okay, there is something interesting happening in this world. If you don't know the solution till now, you can pause the recording now, rethink on how you would solve this problem. Okay, the problem is simple. As a developer, you would add so many log statements. Why? Because you have to be confident functionality is working. But the same code, when it goes to the production, the rate by which the file goes on filling up becomes a real headache. It occupies quickly and gives a problem. So a thing which can be achieved after 6 months, you end up achieving it after 2 months or 3 months, which is really bad. Okay, how you can help it? Just think about this. This is the problem statement. You think how you would provide the solution, and once you are coming up with something, then you can compare it. Means in next 2 minutes we would start with how Log4j team has actually fixed it. You can compare your approach with their approach. It might be like you have a better idea than how Log4j people are doing it. Okay, don't underestimate your idea. If you have got a better idea, try to compare, but try to understand what problems might come in your idea. Okay, try to understand that, and that is what would make you a mature developer. Okay, so now I'm just taking a break for water, 2 minutes break, and in that you can think over. Okay, so hi back. So now let's see how Log4j people has tried to address this problem. Okay, now in Log4j there is a concept called as let me take it like rolled. Here I would make it like Log4j is having a concept called as logging levels. Okay, logging levels. This is one very basic thing, and as a developer you have to work with these logging levels only. Okay, now what are these levels? Let me first note them down. trace debug info, and believe it, this entire knowledge is required to do a simple application of log4j. That means you can understand how important it is. Means without all this you cannot even comfortably, confidently write your basic log4j application. It's practical to do it, you can do that, but this would give you the maturity of knowing what it is about. So I am going with the theory stuff first, so you understand basically what you want to do and how you do it. Okay, logging levels: trace, debug, info, warn, error, fatal. These are logging levels in increasing order. What is this order? I'll talk about it, but just assume it. Debug is having a value more than trace, info is having a value more than debug and trace, warn is having higher value than all this, then comes error, and then last fatal. Okay, so this is how the chain would go, least to the topmost in terms of priority or the order. Now what does this mean? Okay, remember that here we are talking about writing or replacing system.out.println line with something else which can still fulfill your requirement of logging. That is what is the basic aim that we have here. Okay, now how do you solve it? That means you need to have some other statement. We are in a Java world, OOPS world. Object oriented programming means we need to work with objects, we need to work with classes. Here system is a class, the out is nothing but some object available within system which is of some class, and there is a method, nothing but we have to replace this with something else which is provided by log4j. Simple, that's simple. That means you need one object which provides a capability of doing the logging, so that object is nothing but of the class logger. It is provided in the log4j API, a predefined class, Java class available called as logger. Okay, now in this logger statement you create an object, use this object, somehow you create it. How do you do that? We would see practically about it, but somehow you create this object, get it instantiated. Okay, once instantiated, in this logger object there would be methods which would help you to write data to files, to wherever you want, to console file, whatever log4j is capable of. But there are methods just the way like this. Print ln is one method, print is another method, both writes the data to the file. Similar kind of thing in logger, there are methods like trace. You can pass your string value here. There are methods like debug, info, warn, error, fatal. Simple. Nothing but logging levels that we just talked about. What is logging level? We'll come to it, but there are some logging levels. In order to implement those logging levels, there are methods available like this. Okay, now how this solves our previous problem? Straight away instructions would be given to the developer. Okay, that okay, you said for programming, for your actual development approach, you need to add so many logger statements. Fine, go ahead, do that, but your logger statements should be inside debug mode. Means you have to set your logging level to debug. Okay, if you are using this method debug, then it becomes a debug level, and then under development your application would run it in a debug mode or in a debug level set, and all those statements which are written using logger.debug would be printed on the file. Okay, it's actually all the statements with debug and above would be printed in the file. Nothing but if you write logger.debug, logger.info, warn, error and fatal, any of this if you use and your running environment is set to the debug level, automatically all these would be written on the file. But before that, if you are using logger.trace, that is not going to be written in the file. Okay, that means even though the code is there, you have written in the code, in your kilo lines of code, you have written logger.trace, but actually it's not really going to be displayed in the file. By that means, even though code is there, but because of some external configuration of logging level, you can control which things should go to the file and which things should not go to the file. Okay, and believe it, for any project you go, ideal strategy would be your development environment would run in a debug level set, and the production environment would run in info level set. That's it. In your production, info level would be there, and in your developer debug level generally. But if you want to take it more down, you can take it to trace level, but in production, believe it, it would be info level set. So that means only those statements which are written using info or more would be displayed in your production log files. Now this is one very important thing which you should be careful about, right? Suppose you are doing your testing in development environment, by mistake you have written everything using the debug, logger.debug, and it is providing you all the answers also. Like if something is wrong, you looking at the logs, you are able to tell what's wrong. You have written it in that manner. But now suppose in production manager says, okay, there is a problem in production, please identify like what's going wrong. As a developer, you would be happy, okay, I have already added logs, and you would thank yourself and then go to the log file and see, come on, your logs are not at all there because the level is set to info. That means only these logs are available, your logs are gone. Then you would repent, oh my god, I should have properly written this, I should have set some at least major statements in a info mode so that it gets displayed in the log files. So now there is a decision that you have to make. Somehow the level of your dev would be at debug, but in production the level is set to info. It's some external configuration. Using that external configuration, you can on the fly set it, and this would give you a feeling of bypassing your code. Even though you have written trace debug, it would not be displayed on the file, but rather info and above would be displayed. So this is where logging levels is very important, and this is what is practicality. Okay, now let's talk about coding this stuff practically. A lot of theory done, probably you might have got a lot of confidence about this, like how basically problems would be coming and how do you solve it. So this is just an example of how Log4j team has done it. Okay, so now let us see of how doing it. First of all, like I said, it provides all these basic features. You can write to a console, you can write to a file, you can work with multiple files and all these things. Okay, it is all practically possible, maybe in the form of some configurations. Okay, you need to do some configurations, work with some XML files where you say what do you want, whether you want a console writing or a file writing. You can decide all that. Okay, now let us see how to work with that. Again, if you don't know how to work with Log4j, if you know this theory stuff only, based on this you can do Google. Okay, go to Google, search it properly, like how do you write data to a file using Log4j. It's that simple. You would find so many examples. That means if you are in IT world, it's not required that you remember everything, but just understand the concept, remember the concept, think logical, talk logical. That would make you a different person. Okay, now let me say how we can do it. Actually, I was doing some Googling. Okay, and while Googling, I found one link and I just bookmarked it, like in MK Yong it's available. A simple clear cut thing of how Log4j configurations are. What we talk theory, it's just the practical thing. It can be anything, doesn't matter what the code is about, but is it meeting your requirement? You just have to use it and use it wisely. That's it. So what it says, it's a configuration first of all, which you need to do as part of a file called as log4j.xml. So first thing you have to be clear when you're trying to implement Log4j. implementing log4j. First file, there should be a configuration which supports things which are discussed above. That configuration generally comes as XML file, XML configuration, or property file configuration. It can be any. Okay, now for a project, either it would be XML or it would be property. Believe it, working with XML makes life simple. So most of the people project actually believe it. Since past my 6 years of experience, I have always worked with XML. But same, whatever possible with XML, you can do it with property file also. Okay, so for some project, don't be surprised if you see property file, but it's simple. You just have to check what is the thing and put it, just Google it and get it done. Okay, it's not a big deal at all. So now XML file configuration and property file configuration, two things. Okay, now first thing, by default name is log4j.xml. You just need to have this file in your class path, and automatically the name is log4j.xml. If it is there in the class path, that's it. You need not worry about any other external configuration. If you are changing the name and location, then things would be becoming a bit different. There you have to give some more details. There is some Java class which allows you to pass the path and the name of this variable file name. So that is a different story. We'll come to that. Okay, but for now it's simple. Log4j.xml, it is the fixed predefined name. If you just put this kind of file log4j.xml in the class path, that's enough for the log4j environment to get active. That's it. No other configuration required. And generally people would do this. They would create a folder like configuration folder or somewhere which is added to the class path, and inside that they would add log4j file itself, so they avoid all any other configurations. Okay, all these things would be there. So now let us prepare a log4j.xml. So I would work with the same project which is already shared to you by Prakash. Okay, and in this I would be doing some basic stuff and sharing it. Let me first of all just deploy this project. Right click, run as Maven build package, and I'm just running it. Okay, so there is a var file available here, so I just need to deploy this var file. Just see, this is how I work in my company. So this is how I move things from here and there. So if that helps you by some way, you can also habituate. It's just the way by which I work. So we have to deploy it in Tomcat. So Tomcat is nothing but under web apps location. So when you go under web apps, some fresh deployment you're doing, so just you have it here, target available, drag it, drop it there next to web app. So we know that in bin directory your things would be, you can simply type command prompt here and okay. So next what we do here, catalina.bat, this is a bat file, start it. Okay, so when you start, this is how the Tomcat server starts, and it's trying to read, initialize a lot of things. It's coming up. Just one thing to observe here, just see what is here written, info, right? Nothing but this is the production environment of Tomcat. That means Tomcat is also using some debugging tool inside. These are all the log statements which they printed it on the console. Nothing but using log4j, it's possible to print things on the console. Parallelly, how Tomcat people do is, Tomcat is having a location called as logs. Just see, they created so many log files internally for their purpose. This is what I was talking about. What I do is I kill this. process killed, I delete this, shift delete. Now again start the process. Just see, catlina.bat start. Just see, log files created, data being written to that also. That means they write the data to the console plus they are writing the data to the file. Both are possible with log4j. Second important thing, they are writing the data here in info mode. That means they might have done some configuration like only info statements and above should be printed. Okay, if they have written in code anywhere of their debug statement, they would not be printed. Okay, that would also be some configuration. We'll come to that configuration part, but just see, this is all is available. Okay, you can open any of it. Just see, info, whatever you saw it on the console, right? We saw this starting and all that stuff. It's all printed on this file also with every detail of it, because for them it's a project, they have developed it, and that is what things are. They are also saying what kind of applications, docs they have deployed in web apps, examples, there's something manager and blah blah blah. So all these things are deployments that they do here. Next, deployed on web application of this one. So it's all there. Okay, so now what happens? So this was one observation. Now let me go to execution model of it. For me it's this one. I have to choose the project name to be of. It extracted it automatically. Just come here. Okay, just something available. I would just like to put it on some functionality. Suppose anything, if you try to log in basically, or if you suppose forget password, actually I think that link is also discussed. So let me just take that. You click on forget password, something happens. If you open the console, here some statement is written. Okay, it might be done by any way, it might be a system.out.println and all. Okay, now we are here to replace those things only. Okay, so first what happened is it went here, so that means it clearly gave a clarity. So in this case, this shows logging helps. Means I don't know in the entire code, just assume that this is a very big code in front of me. I don't know where what thing is happening. I just clicked on one link, and there in the console there is something which says login controller dot forget pass form. Actually this method of this class is called. It makes my life simple. I just copy it. Suppose I just do right click, edit, mark login controller, copy it, go here. There is a shortcut available, simply Control Shift T. You can type the class name there, login controller. What method it's saying? Method is forget pass form. Just do Control O, forget pass form. This is the method, and this is what is the logger statement done. Now what I did, I just went the Control Shift T, then did a Control O, and I just typed what is there, forget pass form, open it. That is where IDE can simplify a lot of stuff. So this statement is printed and it has redirected to something else. This is where log statements would simplify. But now let's come back to another point. If you don't know in the code where your thing is and you're just trying to figure out what's happening, okay, how you can do it is again simple. If you don't know like where our functionality is, you just click on this, forget password. See what happens at the URL. When we do a forget password, it's actually going in this. That means it has something to do with this. So you can just simply copy it, go here, search your entire, because you don't know where it is, search the entire file for this, search. Just see in the project it's being used at one place, so it's matching it here, it comes here only. So means these are ways by which you explore the code. And if not that, if you cannot trust this, simple, go back here, right click, view page source. Okay, currently it's disabled, so these kind of things keep on happening. Okay, page source was not is disabled. Oh, page info was disabled. So sometimes it's possible to view block your page source also. You can again do googling about it. Everything is possible. Now what is there? Forget password. This is the link. Means it should be some text written here. Just go there, Control F, Control V. It's not here. Means has it, enter password. Images.google. enter password is there. What's happening? Login form is there, username, password. Just see, forget password. Actually it didn't search my text because I gave a space in between. Is it? Now it's saying forget password because of the enter nature. Okay, now you come here and it says when you click on the forget password, this string is being generated. Now based on this string itself, which showed the string here which was generated, now you went to the file here, you got the location. Now here you found this is system.out.println, that is why it printed on the console. Now first thing, let's see how we can print it on the console using log4j. It's again simple, we just need to have the proper log file created. So log4j.xml is our proper log file. Just go here, copy this stuff. First of all, the name should be there and it should be in the class path. It's simple. Already we know that when working with Eclipse, if you add a file under src folder, it goes in your class path directly. So you can add, right click, new, other, XML, you can name it log4j.xml, finish. Okay, you go here, simply you just copy this content out. Forget about what is the configuration. IT never cares about it. IT just cares about making it working. Is it what meets your requirement? If it is unnecessary, you got to delete it. Simple. Okay, some log4j configuration. So now just see here, console you are saying, that means it puts it on the console. Some things, and there is something called as root level. I'll explain all of this. Okay, there is a root level available and later on appender you have configured. But one important thing to understand, that you're using some predefined class given by the log4j team. So that should straight away give you a thought like, okay, if there are classes like this configured, so automatically you have to have this jar in your class path. You need to search what is the jar file, you need to work with the log4j, and that file would contain this, and then only your application can run. So that means your coding should also be logical. You cannot simply copy paste code here and there and work on the code. You should understand, okay, this code itself, the XML configuration demands me to have a log4j jar, some jar in my class path. How do you find the jar? It's again simple. If you don't know that, go to Google, log4j maven dependencies. If you just type this, because we are working with build world. Okay, so now let me just check back with my net, log4j maven dependencies. You just go here, okay, and just click on this one, some logger. Remember one thing, log4j is a one-time configuration. Okay, nothing but this adding of the jar file, writing the log file and all that. This would be done one time by someone. Later on people would start using it and updating the old thing. That means suppose now I picked up log4j 1.2.17 version. Okay, just copying this maven dependency. So you know maven, basic of maven, where we add these dependencies, pom.xml. You simply go there. Okay, when you go to the pom.xml, in the dependencies list, first let's confirm that log4j is not there. Logging, that is different. No, log4j not there. You can simply go here and in the end of it add log4j dependency, search. Okay, so by default what happens is, let's see, you can do maven update. It's a basic maven now, make a maven update to get it, or if you save it, it gets sometimes downloaded automatically. Eclipse takes care of downloading it. Now let's confirm whether it's there or not there. Maven dependencies, is there something called as log4j? I'm just doing L. Yes, there is log4j available. Okay, once log4j is available, you need to confirm that whether this file is available in your class path or not, right? What you do is copy this, do a Control Shift T. Just see that this file is available as part of the jar which we just now added. That means right jar is there in the class path, and at runtime we won't get any surprises. Okay, so now once all this thing is done, means happy, you have the code with you. You can see, just see now they are also using System.out and all things like that. Okay, so target is System.out, whatever form it takes. So means it is all coding written, and that is where I said it would write the data to the file also. Okay, so just this is what is Java coding which they have done. So now printing it console. Now what if you write this, nothing but you write just simply system.out.println, you simply got this. Okay, but when we talk about logging, only the statement is not enough. You need to have more information, like at what time it is created, right, and things like that. So that means we have to have more logging stuff other than the basic comment that we do. Okay, so those logging stuff can be specified. What more details you want can be specified in terms of some pattern, like on so and so date and time, and this is also something available. What is this pattern? We'll see it once we run a Log4j app example, then we'll compare it with this. But there is a pattern. Rather than simply writing this kind of statement here, we can write it in some pattern, and that is where you are going to get it. Okay, so now what happens? So this is just a configuration which says on the console data should be gone. Okay, but believe it, this is just the definition of it. You are not invoking it, or it is not being used. Okay, it gets used only when you configure it something like this. Okay, a root tag. Now what is a root tag? I'll come to that point, but just this is a configuration where you use this console. Now just see this console that you placed here, you have passed it as a tag called as appender reference. So this two has to be same, otherwise problem. So you are mentioning it console, and this console, it is going to the console, and what you are saying, level value is debug. This is what I was saying. The environment needs to be set at some logging level. That means even though in your code you might have written all of these, but only debug and above that things would be used for it. Okay, so this is what this configuration means. So this is the console configuration done. Okay, but now we are talking about replacing the system.out.println. Nothing but we need to call this method also now logger, create the object of logger somehow, and then do it. Okay, now how they do it in your companies, it's simple. What they do is they create a separate class. Okay, suppose since we are debugging the mailing thing, I would simply write inside the mailing, right click new class, mailing dot utils. In that mail loggers, or simply they can say loggers.java, a class in which they define all set of loggers. Okay, only the definition is here, they would use it in all other places. So this again keeps the code organized, searching becomes easy. Okay, so now how do you do it? You have to instantiate logger. Okay, there are so many available, we have to use logger org.apache.log4j. Okay, if you do googling how this code happens, you would understand in which jar and what file should be there. Just simply write console logger is equal to logger dot get logger of. This is how it can be done. Console logger. Okay, now this is how it's the definition done. This is how we generally define an object. But what people do is whatever they write here, console logger, the same thing they mention here also, because it's become easy for identification. Okay, nothing more than that. It logically makes sense. Okay, now make this as public static and final as well. So there is again Java convention, when you write as final, this becomes like it has to be in looking like a constant value, and it comes like this public static final. Now you have done all this basic stuff. It's just defined. This is how you instantiate. Now wherever in the code you want to write the data to the console, you should be using this object. How do you do this? The way we do system.out. Now for you it should be mail logger dot. Mail logger dot. You have exposed it publicly, statically. Console logger dot. Then the method what you want, debug. Same thing, suppose using logger. That's simple. Means instead of writing this kind of code, now I would be writing this kind of code. This is my custom class, a logger which I have defined. It's an instantiate. Your output is the instance of print stream. Your logger is the console is the instant of logger. Println method prints it on wherever it requires. Debug prints it on what is the configuration. Simple. You just take this, right click, run as Maven build, just deploy it on the application. You can work with other way around when Tomcat is configured in your local machine itself. So with Eclipse you can bind it. But I prefer doing it in this manner. That is how I have habituated myself. I drag, I drop, I just run this. Okay, just see. Now there is a lot of observation. Initially, when we deployed our code, okay, these many statements were not going. Now what happened? I want to show you something. Previously, we were only seeing infos. Now all of a sudden, debug also came. And who's this debug belong to? Is this in our code? No. It is not in our code. It is available as part of the code of Tomcat. Something which Tomcat people internally has done. Dispatcher servlet, this might be related to something our code, but all this other code, JNDI and all, this is something very internal and to Spring environment and to the Tomcat environment. Now all these debug statements also are visible. Previously it was not there. That means whatever you have written, the configuration, root configuration, it is not just applicable for your project, but it is applicable for the entire environment. That is what is root at the most top level. We just set this level to debug. So previously this level, since Tomcat is running in the production environment, they set the level to info. But when we deployed our application, we changed that level to debug, and that is where we are able to see all the log statements of other Spring and all that also. Okay, we are able to see all that. Means Spring people also followed the same thing. When they were doing the development, they did it with putting the log level as debug. But when Spring people came live, they made it in info. That is why we are not seeing those many number of, we didn't see those many number of debug statements. Now it's all Spring internal what they do. Okay, returning cache handler, bean named URL mapping and all, these are all Spring classes, right? ORG Spring framework. So with logger it's shown. If I change this mode to info mode, again deployed, believe it, all these would be gone. Okay, that is how the log settings happen, level settings happen. All this is fine. Now let's come back to our point of testing whether our change is working or not. Go back here. We have added a logger statement at the appropriate line. Just click this forget password. A lot of other things. That is what is because other things are also shown in debug mode. All that is fine. We are least bothered about this. We need to check our statement out of this. So that is where you have to, logging on the console can give you this headache. You have to scroll, you have to search. Successfully completed, reviewing. Just see here, mark. These two statements are ours. What is the difference? Big time difference. System.out.println simply placed this line. When you use a statement like this, you printed the text only, But because of this thing, what exactly happened here? Just come and observe it here. There is a pattern. There is the debug in what thing it was written. Next, there is a name of the logger, what we used, console logger. It is also having the line number where it appeared. Then it says all this thing. That means if there is a information like this, that would simplify your life, right? You can, it would simply say console logger is being used at line number 46 of somewhere, and on so and so time in debug mode it was there. Basic stuff. How this entire string is being generated is because of this console logger is currently configured here, and since we have developed configured a root level, and root means applicable for any logger, you have set the entire environment. So because of this root configuration, it says it should be written on console. What does that mean? Console is having this pattern inside it. Okay, so that means you define any number of loggers. Suppose main logger, console logger you have written, you define one more logger here. Currently let me just name it as my logger. You put it here. Now you write mylogger.debug, mylogger.info. It is also going to use the configuration which is written inside the root. That is what is root. It is a generic applicable for any kind of logs that you configure. You can use now mylogger.debug. It would also be using the same configuration here, printing it on the console. Now let's compare the pattern which was there. YYYY, DD, hours, minutes, seconds. Next, hyphen 5p, that actually is talking about what method was used, debug method. Then it says it's some syntax. Okay, you might have done some C programming or something, replacement happens, so it's something like that. Next, C1, which is nothing but actually picking up your console name. Then next, colon is the separator, so here you see the separator. L is talking about the line number, so you see the line number here. And then hyphen is this one, and whatever you write, percentage M and N, that is nothing but giving you the string. That means whatever this is printed here, this is what is that pattern, and which is really required. It tells on what date and time things happen. So by this way, logger can really simplify task. Okay, but now just see one thing here, that we have done, what we have done is defined main logger like this, debug mode set, all things done. But now assume that, okay, the root level we cannot keep it like debug. Why? Because if the root is debug, life is problem. It's printing all spring things are also, and right, and for figuring out these two piece of lines, we got so many other things and it was painful, right? So we cannot really continue with that. So your root level is also always preferred to be in info. Because it's all configuration based on your requirement, you have to keep on changing it. Okay, root level you set it to info. Now comes the question, root is set to info automatically, then now your logger statements would not be coming. Why? Because your logger statements is written in debug mode. It would all be skipped. Then how do you solve this problem? That is where there is one more configuration available here, which becomes specific to your loggers which you define, called as, and this is what is more helpful, logger. You just define it here. Logger name is equal to, you give the name of the logger which you have configured here, console logger. Okay, that means to your specific loggers you can have a control rather than having a generic. If you write root, it was applicable for both of these. Now what you are doing is you are writing it at logger level. Logger name is equal to console logger level. Set it to what you want. Here you write debug any of these can be used there. Trace, debug, info, warn, error, fatal, whatever you feel like. Here you set it to debug, means console logger debug would still use this console. This is again, mapping is required, use it. Okay, one more thing. Okay, there is one property available in this logger tag called as additivity. Okay, now additivity is equal to false. What it does basically, now just see, we are trying to use actually I was just sometime working with Log4j in my initial days, and I didn't use this additivity field. What I observed is, sometimes even though my log level was not set to an expected value, there was a problem basically. Okay, even the log level here I have set it to debug, and in my code I am trying to use a lower level trace and all that, but that was some way coming out. Okay, that was happening. Why? Because it was using the root level, it was getting more priority to this and then picking this one also. So that means unnecessarily things were going here and there. It was something like confusing. Then I was confused, and then after googling I got the information, okay, there is a field additivity which can actually block it. I didn't do much R&D on that, like what exactly field, how it blocks it, but yes, it is helpful. So if you spend some time again googling, so these kind of things would become small POCs for you, and that would help a lot. Okay, so now simply go here, additivity is equal to false, console logger, put it in debug mode on this. Great, work done, you are still using it. Now what you do is go back here, mailing logger dot my logger dot debug using my logger in debug mode. Let's see, I just want to do this for some demonstration, so we have some parallel things happening. Okay, right click, run as Maven build. Either you every time write it, or you can use the past history also. Start it. Okay, now just see, previously there was a flood of messages. Now is there anything in debug? Infos here, next infos here, also infos, just have I here, it's all infos. That means now the root is not trying to do the problem. Root level set to info. This is what is logger, which is used by Log4j team. Okay, so they are also trying to analyze things. So thing is, this logger is used by the Log4j, which says this one they are using class name console appender. This is what they have scanned our code actually and trying to do something based on it. Okay, setting console appender additivity is equal to false, logging value set to the debug mode, and all those things. So means they have actually understood our code very properly. Now all things done. Next thing, Log4j code. Just go here, some observations here. First thing, I clicked the same thing, means behind it's running the same method. System.out.println, yes, came. Second, even though root logger is set to info, I am using a method called as debug. I have specially configured for console logger debug mode. So that means your individual configuration is taking a priority over root level configuration. This is debug, this is debug. You see this line on the console. But same other thing, my logger I wrote it in debug mode, but here there is no special separate configuration for my logger. If I want to do that, I'll just copy paste this and have it. Okay, there is no configuration like that. If there is no configuration, then it uses root level configuration. Root level is set to info. That is where here that my logger thing is not displayed. Okay, so that means if you want to precisely configure for specific loggers at that point of time, you have to define them separately here. Okay, otherwise it falls back to the root level and uses it. So this is what is the basic thing that would happen. Okay, now one more demonstration. Suppose that, okay, this is all we have done with the console. Now let's go to the second demonstration of file. How we can do that? Again, simple, no need to worry much. Go here, what it says, output to a console, fine, output to a file, great. So you have to now see and choose out of this only. What I feel is the new thing between these two, if you compare, the only thing is this appender change. So why copy the file? I'll copy the appender. Go to your log4j. You can define n number of appenders, you can define n number of loggers, but there should be only one root tag. You just have to name these things differently. Console is here you put something else. File. Okay, here the class becomes rolling file logger. Just get it confirmed whether this class is there in the class path. Control Shift T. Yes, it's also there as part of the same jar which we have previously had it. Okay, so now fine, append is equal to false, it is something not required. Now just see all experiments with respect to file which I said. Okay, like max file size 10 KB this person says. Next, max backup index 5, nothing but maximum 5 files would be created and each file size would be 10 KB. Beyond that the data would keep on deleting. If you don't use this, then what happens? You go to this class, rolling file appender, max file size, the default maximum is 10 MB. There is one backup file by default. So it would use the default configurations if you're not putting it, but there is always a restriction. Okay, next, where do you want the file to be generated? Okay, now just see, we deploy our code in web apps. Logs are generated in logs folder. From web apps I have to come one root level up, go inside logs and do it. So if you do this, it takes the entire path wherever it is installed, or from the current location you can do something like this, /logs, and say that my mailing.log file. Just name it something as per the convenience. Okay, it should be something logical to your module, to your service which you use, and that's it. Once done, you can use REST pattern the same and just do it. Now if you see this my logger we have used, it is not printed anywhere. I can use this configuration now, my logger. I just have to define it separately, logger tag. My logger comes here, additivity is equal to false, level you set it to your choice, and you want to use it in a file mode. Okay, again one important thing, this log4j.xml configuration is a one-time thing, means this file would be one time created by either your team lead. Okay, by either your team lead. So now what is going to happen later on, when as a developer you start working on it, so simply in that case you would be modifying one file out of it, or you would just be adding these logger tag dependencies. Okay, your role would just be this much, files would be there, you just need to add a proper logger here, decide, okay, I'm going to use this logger for my application, go in this log4j.xml configuration file, add your logger, put the proper level as whatever you feel like, debug info based on your requirement, choose the proper appender, whether you want to use file or something else, because if it is already existing file and your lead says okay your messages should also go to that file, means it is already defined. If you feel like a new file should be created, discuss it, define a new configuration, use it like this, and all things done. Now just simply save it. Okay, saved, just go back here, roll it, let me undeploy it from here. Web apps, shift delete. Okay, done. I just want to clear the log files also from here. Shift delete, done. Move target this where, and be very careful when you delete something. Okay, sometimes it gets into problems in companies because you are habituated with some commands, and it really gets into problems if you don't do it properly. You might end up deleting some stuff which is important. So before deleting anything, be double, triple careful what you're doing. Oops, I have by default deployed it in this folder. Control X. Let me go to the web apps. Here I'll deploy it again. Just see, I deployed, they read it, they extracted it. They have the information with them. Now go to the logs folder. Just see, there is a file created mymailing.log. That means they have already scanned my log4j XML file. They created mymailing.log file and placed it inside the logs. That is nothing but they have read all this configuration. Once done, now what? Simple. Again, try to reproduce your use case. Now console things I am least bothered about what comes on the console, because that is not my worry. We are trying to redirect it to a file. Clicked here. Let's see whether anything went to the file or not. Go to the logs, open this, reload it. Yes, my logger statement is not now going to a file named my-mailing.log. Okay, so by this way things keep on happening. Now let me again take the opportunity to demonstrate the rolling nature also, and when this reach then roll it. How I can do that? Simple. The same logger which I am moving to the file, I'll put it inside a for loop just for demonstration purpose. Okay, I am just playing with the code. For I is equal to 1, I is less than equal to, your code should be easy to read. Nice. I plus plus. Okay, this line movement you can do by doing just go to that line, alt and up and down arrow. By this way line moves. Okay, so this properly align it in a for loop 100 times, or let's say 500 times. I'm just printing this statement just for showing you how quickly the things fill out. Okay, now again run it. This exercise becomes a bit headache, but later when in companies we work with Linux environment, we are left with not much choice, because Linux environment based server, we cannot configure it in your Windows Eclipse basically. Even if you configure it, then also you are working in an integrated manner, the team would be dependent, so you have to do it in a manual manner. Okay, you cannot on the fly deploy things and all, so that's why I have habituated to this manual process. Now deploying it there, running. This is up, extracted, great. Now okay, just click on this forget password. Something happened, let's see. Reload it. Yes, this is reloaded. This, just see, it has printed it 500 number of times. Okay, now I have written it so many number of times, the file size contains less. So what exactly happened? Go to the web apps, logs. Just see here, automatic rolling happened, right? And approximately we said 10 KB, but the number of files that are being generated is of like 11 KB, they say. Maybe after reaching 11 they are rolling it off. So we have given a maximum backup index of only 5, right? Just check our configurations back. We have given maximum 10 KB size each, 5 each. So till now what is the point? We just single click, these 3 files are all filled with 11 KB of data, and this file is now having some pending KB. Okay, so that means if I click it again, it should ideally make double of it. right? So now let me show you that. But before showing you, just one small thing. When we launch our Linux environment, there would be a tool which comes in picture called as Mobaxterm. Okay, that really helps us in simplifying our efforts. You can simply go to your target location. We'll precisely officially launch this. This is not the official launch of Mobaxterm, but Mobaxterm is one tool which can give you a feeling of Linux environment in your Windows operating system. Okay, nothing but you can use your Windows Linux commands like ls, it's a Linux command, date, a Linux command, so you can use all that in here. So I just want to show you one command called as tail -f mymailing.log. okay, I'm just tailing it, so that means on the fly when something is written, these things would be displayed out. Okay, so I just go here, server, have I deployed my latest? Yes, it's already deployed, so I just go here. Okay, just see a lot of things added because I've done a star. I'm seeing it's all added. Okay, but now the point is how much is in which file. For checking that means on the fly when something is happening, your tail statements catches it here. Okay, so this is very helpful. Second important thing, go to your logs, just see 5 log files maximum. Previously itself it created 3, means next time when you do it again it should create 6, but we have added a max limit for it, so it rolls and stops at the 5. So by this way the logging environment works, and believe it, all these would become critical. So you can have a number of configurations here and all that. So okay, so this is how things would be working. Now people sometimes make this kind of configuration also. Suppose control logger, rather than defining it using the class name, okay, like in mail logger we have using something like string name for defining. What people do is use something specific to class. Sometimes simply name it logger and here mention login controller dot class. Okay, this is another way of doing it, so you should not be surprised if you see it by the class name also. Okay, now you use this logger dot whatever is our method, logger dot same thing, debug or info or warn or whatever it is. Okay, I'll just use this for one demonstration. I'll just write all sorts of things. Trace class level defined logger at trace. So all these are just experiments, so that I am showing you how you can play with logs and all. Debug. I know the session is getting elongated, but I would prefer you watch it in some iterations, maybe 2-3 of them, so that would really simplify things. Don't do it in one sitting because it might bounce over your head also. I know it's not really that tricky to understand, but once you understand it would be nice, but too much on a single day might be bad. Trace debug info warn error fatal. So now just tell me, I have defined a logger like this, blah blah blah. Out of this log4j, which configuration would it be loading? Yes, which configuration? If you think it's root, then that's right, because you have not given any precise configuration for this logger login controller. It goes here, it's not able to find anything like that. It just simply goes here, uses the root configuration. It is set to info. When the root is set to info, it comes back here, and you're trying to write trace debug info and all these. So in such kind of cases, these statements would be printed, but not these two. Can you show this practically? Yes, I'll do that. Right click, run as run server package. Web apps. it, put it here, start it. So by default root means what? Root simply means console, so no need to worry about the file behind. So I am here, go back here to our demonstration page. Forget password, just see what happened. Class level, okay, all this is okay. Behind the log4j logger is actually coming in picture. Whenever they are rolling it, they are actually naming that also. So that is log4j logger, that's okay for us. But next important thing, we have defined all the loggers here: trace, debug, info, warn, error, fatal, all the levels, but the root is set to info. Because of that, what we see in the console is just that much: info, warn, error and fatal, right? If now that is what is actual thing. Trace and debug not displayed, so log setting is taking the priority. Now suppose if you want to define that also as a logger statement, right? Here you would say like it's a string, that's why life is simple. But here I am doing another kind of configuration. This is not a string configuration, this is a class level configuration, right? So here you have to define the fully qualifier name of the class. Just copy this thing, move it here, my logger, put it here, set it to the level you want. Debug, okay fine, debug. You want it file or console, you can define that. You can create a file like this on the fly. It's all playable configuration, like my class file appender, you can define it. Where do you want to go it? Class level something. Generally these would be very specific, like mailing service dot log, something like this. It would be based on the services or the module name that you use for. Okay, all this is fine. This one, just use this my class appender. So I'm showing all these experiments so that gives you a comfort, like okay, it's all there. Okay, this all fine, used it. Right click, run as, maven build, use the most recent one, prepare for the undeployment, shift delete. Once it is done, we would find it here, drag, deploy, restart it. Let's see, now we have created one more file. Once it scans our code, it should prepare one more log actually. Yes, mailing services.log is created. Okay, so in that log file our statements should go, and what our statements are, we have set all this, but this time rather than using root configuration, we are using a defined logger of our thing whose level is set to debug. Now what I can do is, I know this movaxterm tool, clear again Linux command, tail -f mailing service.log, just tail it and keep it here. Go back. Okay, just forget password, click here. Things came, tail statement showed it on the fly what happened, and the point to be known here is debug info warn error, as compared to the previous one where it was only info warn error. That means your configuration available in this tag is taking more priority than the root configuration, and it is also moving to the appender that you have configured. It's possible to copy paste the appender, it's possible to copy paste this logger, change it all based on your requirement, and you can actually get a feel of everything is happening. Okay, so by this way your log4j helps, and it is really the step 1 of debugging process. So this is what today's topic was about: debugging an application. First step would be have logs written properly. Just from behind you can tail it, you can run your use case, what you're trying to do. If there is any exception, if there is any problem, you can find it here. These logs are so mature enough, it tells like at what class, what line you are actually seeing any problem. Go to that, find the problem, fix the problem there, deploy it, again test it back. So that is how Log4j helps at first step of debugging. Okay, tomorrow or later when we meet, we would communicate the timing. Later when we meet, at that point of time, we would be talking about the remote debugging concept, which is the extension of this. Why? Because sometimes Log4j is having a restrictions, like you cannot add n number of lines in this, right? It kills the readability. You have to be very particular. You cannot like after every one line you cannot write a logger statement. In such a kind of case, it really becomes a headache, like how many lines could we write, and even though whatever you do, you are not able to figure out what the problem is. So these kind of problems would be coming in. This also we cannot leave it saying we are not responsible for the project code, but we have to fix it right. Now for fixing it right, the immediate thing that we would be doing is using remote debugging concept. Okay, so that we would be launching how you can do remote debugging with Eclipse and all that. So that would make you a complete person in order to debug and understand maturely what this application can do, and how your project life in IT could be simple. Okay, so it was a long session, but you can break it out in two and have it accordingly. So that's it from my side for today. Hope to see you soon.